Don't let your fruit trees catch a cold. Josh here. I've been growing fruit trees in the ground for 10 years and I've got hundreds planted. And one of the things that I've learned is that cold hardiness or cold tolerance of a fruit tree determines whether or not it's going to succeed in your growing zone. And so it's really important to understand that every tree can survive different winter temperatures. So for example, this pineapple guava that I've got covered here is only going to survive into the low teens, maybe single digits, but I have to cover it in the winter to help protect it from that. It's actually an evergreen tree. It's got these beautiful leaves, sort of glossy green on top, silvery on the bottom. But it's a subtropical tree, so it's not going to do well in really cold northern climates. I'm in the Carolinas, so it survives here. It does really well over the winters, but sometimes we do get a really cold snap and I need to cover it. Now, there are a few different things that you can do to overcome cold issues or cold hardiness issues with your fruit trees, and I'll get into that in a minute. But first, we have to understand that on the back of every label of a fruit tree, you'll see what's the cold tolerance. So I looked at a few today while I was out shopping for fruit trees, which I like to do on the weekends, and I saw that there were a lot of different ranges. So you'll see things like fig trees might be in the 0 to 10 degrees cold tolerance range. That's why a lot of fig trees you want to plant in protected areas. We'll get into that here shortly. Then there's peach trees, which might do, -10, -20 degrees. Apple trees, a lot colder in terms of their ability to survive. Pear trees, same sort of thing. But once you get into the tropical species, it might be 32 degrees and above. So lemons, limes, all the citrus varieties are generally not cold tolerant at all, meaning if it gets below freezing, they will suffer damage. Now, there are a few exceptions to that. Satsuma mandarins, some kumquat varieties. There's a lot of different cold hardy citrus varieties out there. But the idea here is that you need to plant the right tree for your growing zone. So you need to know, how cold is it going to get in the winter? And will that tree survive? And not just survive, but will it thrive? Because some trees, like figs, for example, will die back to the ground every year and then come back up if they're in a really cold environment. Well, that might work okay, but it might not produce the type of fruit or the amount of fruit that you want. Other things that you can do to protect against the cold for varieties that are right on the border, you can put them on a south-facing wall. So I actually did this on an Arctic frost Satsuma mandarin that I'm growing, where I've got it planted up against the south-facing wall. I'm going to use the structure to protect it against the cold northerly winds, and it's going to absorb that heat from that southern sun in the winter when it's at a low angle, and that's going to provide what's called a microclimate, and it really helps boost the ability of the plant to survive in an area that might not survive out in a flat field where it would up against a structure. Another thing that you can do to protect is heavy mulching. That really helps protect the root zone in cold areas. So that's another way that you can overcome it. As we just looked at before, even a simple sheet covered over a plant when you get a cold snap can really help. Obviously, this is a little bit small for that, but you want to make sure that it goes all the way down to the ground, and that ground temperature is actually going to preserve the air. That ground temperature is actually going to preserve some of the heat in that zone, and it's going to sort of fill that space. Some people even go as far as to run a light bulb in there that's going to produce just enough heat to keep it warm enough. Some people go to real extremes and build structures over top of their plants. I've seen that with citrus before. So those are just a few different ways that you can protect your tree against cold snaps when you're on the border. But again, buy the trees that work well in your zone, and you'll have less of a headache and less work to do in the long term. That's my advice to you. I hope you found some value in this, and I'll see you in the next video in the challenge.